Hello, this is Xianbo from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And today I'm presenting a new kind of attack called fingerprint-jacking attack. And this is a practical fingerprint authorization hijacking attack in Android apps. And first of all, let me give you a little bit introduction on myself. I'm a second-year PhD student in the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and I'm from the lab MobiTech. And our lab actually did a lot of work on OAuth security before. If you're interested, you can check our previous talk, including Black Hat Asia last year and Black Hat Europe in 2016. And for me, my personal interests are mostly on web and Android application security. And I also love CTF and bug bounty, basically anything happening in the security community. And you can find me on Twitter, and this is my Twitter handle. Okay, let's directly jump into the demonstration. And you can see now, here we have a device running Android 10. And we first open an app called the Magic. Magic is a root manager app on Android. If you are an Android developer or if you are a security researcher for Android, then you may be very familiar with this one. And it is just an app that can control which apps on your device can have the root access. Suppose that your device is already rooted. Then we can see in this in our Magic Manager, currently there's no apps being granted the root permission. Then we open our demonstration app, which is a very simple diary app, which only have two buttons. One is to create a new diary and another to view existing diaries. Then, while the victim is using this app, suddenly he will see this interface of the lock screen. If you, like me, you use your fingerprint to unlock your mobile device every day, then you may have this impulse to put your finger onto the fingerprint sensor, right? So this is what our victim did. He put his fingerprint onto the sensor and tried to unlock the device. Then it is unlocked, and the interface is redirected back to the diary app. However, we can see that inside the diary app, it actually executes some command with the root permission. We can see it executed the ID commands and returned with the UID 0. So up to this point, you may guess what happened. Are we presenting some local privilege escalation bugs here? Actually, it's not. We're just presenting some UI attack techniques. So we can see that, go back to the Magic Manager and see that inside the Magic Manager, actually remember the list. Right now, the list contains our demonstration app, meaning that our app has been granted the root permission inside the Magic Manager silently. Okay, talking about the UI attack, the one keyword jumping to your mind may be clickjacking, because our attack also called fingerprint-jacking. So clickjacking is a very classic attack happen in web browser, have a history like about 20 years. So basically, if you the attacker will make some malicious website, and meanwhile underneath the malicious website there will be some target website. So when the victim thinks he's like playing some game in this malicious website by click here and click there, what actually happens is that he's clicking those buttons in the background, which will authorize the money transfer, for example, in the online bank. So our observation or our motivation is that nowadays people use the fingerprints everywhere, especially on mobile devices, for different purposes. For example, we can simply use our fingerprint to authorize the money transferring in our mobile wallet, or we can use the fingerprint to unlock this some app, like the diary app in our first demonstration. So The fingerprint jacking attack we present here is basically it's a UI attack, and the target of this attack is to let the user trick the user into authorizing some dangerous actions without noticing it. So the interesting findings we want to share with you today is that first of all we find several attack techniques to conduct this fingerprint jacking attack, and here the highlighted keyword is practical, and we'll explain later why our attack can be considered practical. And then because we find that actually in Android have some mitigation to block this kind of attack. However, we managed to bypass the mitigation in Android OS. Mentioning about the UI attack in Android, the first thing we need to introduce here is the Android activity lifecycle, which is basically a state machine model for Android activities. Activity in Android just means the window or page in Android, just UI either interface. And in this below diagram, it's a simplified illustration of the activity lifecycle model. You can see when some activity is created, it will first go into some create state, and then it will go to the start state, and finally stays in the resume state when it is running. Then, after some time, when it is switching, it will switch to the background, or some other app is brought to the foreground covering it. Then it will go into the pause state, and if it is invisible, it will finally go into the stop state. Now we have the basic idea of how the activity lifecycle works. Then let's look at what's the activity lifecycle behavior when some normal apps do the fingerprint authorization. Here we have some normal apps. Then when it tries to do the fingerprint authorization or authentication, it will start or launch a new activity which contains the fingerprint authorization functionality. And then this new activity, fingerprint activity, will go through the create, start, and then stays in the resume state. And later, when it is switched to the background or some other apps goes into the foreground, then it will go into the pause state. And then if it is invisible, it will go into the stop state. Well, right now, the very important question for attackers is that whether the fingerprint activity can continue listening to fingerprint inputs when it is in the foreground. And this brings up our initial idea for the fingerprint jacking attack. The basic idea is like this. First of all, we assume that we already have some malicious app installed on victim device, and this malicious app actually can disguise itself as some normal benign app. Then after some attack setup, finally what the malicious app can do is that it can launch the fingerprint activity in the target app, and meanwhile he can use some covering activity to cover the fingerprint activity, and he can make some visual contents to lure the victim to input his fingerprint, and actually the fingerprint goes into the background target app. So now the question is, what kind of attack setup can allow this whole thing happen? To introduce that, we actually need to consider different apps implementation pattern and different Android OS versions. Here, this complex diagram summarize all the fingerprint jacking attack techniques we know, including some previously introduced some known attacks, as well as some new attacks we will present in this talk. And to tell you the truth, we didn't do this research from the beginning to do such a thorough study on this. At first, I was try to do the bug hunting in some particular mobile wallet app, and then I find one technique to make this fingerprint jacking happen. And then further, we we do more study and grow into this complex diagram. And you can see on the right-hand side, there are actually 5 attack techniques: translucent attack, wake-up, bypass, and, including the wrist attack. Those in the red boxes are our new attacks. And the attack techniques can be categorized in 3 categories. The first one, they exploit some unusual features or some special permissions in Android apps. And the second one, they exploit apps implementation flaws. And there are also some attacks that exploit the bug in the Android system itself. First of all, let's review some existing techniques. The earliest similar attacks I can find online is also a presentation in Black Hat USA 2015. Because at that time, Android didn't even provide an official API for fingerprint, the speakers their introduced attack are targeting some old Samsung device. And then more recently, in 2018, in some academic paper titled Broken Fingers, the authors proposed to use the draw over other apps permission, which is a quite dangerous permission to perform the UI confusion attack for fingerprint authorization. And this permission, you may have already know that, are widely used by those, for example, some video call. When you do some video call in some app, you can see this smaller windows floating around and always display above other apps. And in the same paper, they also propose the malicious app can actually control the brightness of your screen, and they can adjust the brightness to be very dark. Then the victim may think that he needs to unlock the device, and he will put his fingerprint on a sensor, which makes the attack happen. And what do we want for our fingerprint jacking attack is that, first of all, we want our malicious app to require no permissions, meaning that the victim doesn't need to grant any permission either at installation or during the app is running. And also, we want our attack to work on even the latest Android versions. So first of all, let's look at what developers can use if they want to implement the fingerprint functionality in Android. They have 2 choices. The first one is Fingerprint Manager API, which is introduced in Android 6. This API only provides the function to call the fingerprint sensor, but they don't provide the UI user interface. And then later, starting from Android 9, they also introduced the Biometric Prompt API, which is a new API for fingerprint, and it has a unified UI and it's more secure. However, it is not backward compatible. Actually, nowadays in the market, we still see a lot of apps are still using the old Fingerprint Manager API, and this is our target for in this presentation. And let's go back to our original question. Can apps listen to the fingerprint inputs in the background? The answer is that it depends on which Android system you're using. If the victim runs Android 8 or Android 7, basically before Android 9, then yes, the app can listen to fingerprint inputs in the background. However, starting from Android 9, they added some mitigation into the Fingerprint Manager API to block the background fingerprint inputs. You can also see that you may notice that we put a question mark here. So does this mitigation actually works, and can we find any bypass to it? Before we talk about those, first we will introduce the case when the victim is running older Android versions, for example, Android 8. Because before Android 9, there's no system level protection, so the apps need to block the background fingerprint input by themselves. And we observe that there are 2 common implementation patterns for apps using fingerprint. The first one is that the apps will cancel the fingerprint listening inside the unpaused event of the activity. And the second one is that they will cancel it in the stop event. So which one is correct? The answer is they need to cancel it on pause event. Why? So to explain it, first we need to introduce some property for Android activity called translucent. An translucent activity running in the foreground covering some background activity, then the background activity will be considered visible by the system. And that means it will only go into pause state, but not the stop state. And this diagram shows the difference in activity lifecycle. On the left-hand side, it's a normal case where the activity 1, the background activity, starts activity 2, which is covering. Then, because the covering is a normal activity, then the background activity 1 will go into the pause state and then go into stop state as usual. On the right-hand side is a case where the covering has the translucent properties. Then the background activity 1 will only go into the pause state, but not the stop state. So this leads to our first attack called translucent attack. In this attack, the malicious app will first try to launch or try to invoke the target app's fingerprint activity and let the target app listening to the user's fingerprint input. And then at the meantime, it will also launch a malicious covering, which is some prepared activity with some visual content can lure the victim to input his fingerprint. Now, because this covering has translucent property, then the background fingerprint activity, which only cancel in the stop state, will not trigger the canceling process. So it can continue listening to user's fingerprint. So when user put his fingerprint onto the sensor, he thinks he's using it to authorize what he's seeing on the screen. However, his fingerprint is utilized by the background activity to authorize other things. So a natural question is how many apps in the market have this implementation flaw? We actually built an automatic static analyzer based on FlowJoy to do this evaluation. We collected more than 2,000 sample apps from the market, and then among them, our analyzer can successfully handle about 700 apps. And inside those 700 apps, we find that almost half of them contain implementation flaws. Notice that this analyzer we built only performs conservative analysis. This means the true situation can be even worse. Okay, so this attack we just mentioned only works on older Android versions. So what happened in Android 9? Starting from Android 9, they add a mitigation to block the background fingerprint inputs. And we look into the source code of the Android project and find that the mitigation's logic is like this. The mitigation will be triggered whenever the activity stack changes. So when the activity stack changes, it means that there are some new activities appearing, it's being created, or some activities being destroyed. Then the system will check whether the current foreground activity belongs to the same app as that app is using listening to the fingerprint inputs. If they don't belong to the same app, then the system will queue the fingerprint listener for you. Can we find a bypass? If we want to find the bypass for the mitigation, it means that we want to find a bug in the mitigation. And we all know that when we want to find a bug, first thing we go to is to thinking about those corner cases. So what's a corner case here? Remember that this mitigation is only triggered when the activity stack changes. So how about we first put the fingerprint activity in the background and then let the fingerprint listener start listening. Then there will be no stack change after it starts listening. So also let's recall how these developers, they usually do the implementation. They usually have such fingerprint activity, and they will automatically start the fingerprint listener inside the unresumed events of that activity. So this make the attackers our bypass idea trick easier. So what we want to do is that we want to put the fingerprint activity in the background and then just let it resume. And this is our first idea for the bypass. It calls a wake-up bypass. Basically, the malicious app, as before, it will first launch the fingerprint activity, then launch the covering activity. But because the mitigation, when it launches the covering activity, the background fingerprint activity will be cancelled by OS. Then it will just wait the victim to lock the screen and later unlock the screen. What happened when the device is unlocked is that all those visible activities will be resumed. That which cause the background fingerprint activity start doing the fingerprint listening. All of this is done without causing any change to the activity stack. So the mitigation is never triggered here. And a more practical way to launch this attack is the malicious app can monitoring to the action the screen off broadcast, which allows it to know when before that the user tries to lock the screen, and then right before that the malicious app can set up the attack. And this is the second bypass, which is more interesting, and it works like this. Because starting from Android 7, Android support a new feature called split screen. Basically, the user can use multiple screens at the same time. However, the activity lifecycle is not changed, meaning that there will only be one activity can be in the resume state at the same time. And we also notice that when the user try to resize a split screen, it will result in updates of the activity lifecycle. And here, the diagram shows how this attack will work. First, as usual, we have the malicious app running in one of the split screen window. Then this app can put the fingerprint activity and the covering into the adjacent window by setting some flags. And then, but because the victim see that there's something happening in a smaller window, and he may want to enlarge it to see what happened. And at the same time, when he do the resize, then the activities in that window will become active again, which result in the resume state, resume event being triggered. And that means the activity, the fingerprint listener will start listening. However, the stack has never been changed here. So this can again bypass the mitigation. And the third bypass is some case we found accidentally. Basically, when we are doing testing this attack on some OEM ROM based on Android 9, we find that we can first instead of directly launching the covering, we can first launch some activity in some arbitrary app. However, this activity will crash. We make it so it will crash immediately after it launched. So after that activity crashed, then the malicious activity at any time it can just again launch the covering. Now this time, although there are stack changes, however, the mitigation is not triggered. And because this OEM is closed source, and we didn't investigate further to understand the exact reason behind it. And okay, finally, it comes to the most powerful attack in this presentation. It's called a risk attack, which exploits some risk condition bug in Android system. And we find that if we launch two activities within a very short period of time, it may cause some risk condition in the Android activity lifecycle. And on the right-hand side, you can see it is a trace log, even trace log of Android activity. And the upper part shows the case when we normally launch a victim activity and then use the malicious covering to cover it. Then, as expected, we can see the background victim activity goes into the pause state. And In the below part, that is what happened when the risk condition bug is triggered. We can see the background victim activity only goes into the resume state. So this renders the cancellation on pause become useless, meaning that even the app have the correct implementation, they're still vulnerable to our fingerprint jacking attack. And also, because this bug breaks the Android activity lifecycle, it also breaks Android 9's mitigation. And actually, we reported this issue to Google about half a year ago, and we provided proof of concept video and also source code. Later on, they requested us to test this on the latest Android, so we installed Android 11 and proved it find out it also worked on even Android 11. Recently, we are informed that they will assign a CV ID to this bug, and also they plan to release the patch in January. So before after they release the patch, we may be able to disclose more details. Like, actually, we find several ways to trigger this risk condition bug, and also this bug actually breaks the activity life cycle, so it may also break other things apart from just the fingerprint hijacking attacks we presented here. And okay, this is basically our new attack techniques. And to this point, you may think that, oh, it is not cool because you assume that some malicious app is installed in the victim's device. Well, because I'm a web security guy, so I also don't like such a strong assumption. So I try to make this attack work in web browsers, and finally I find that it is possible, but just with more conditions. So the condition can be summarized as 2 points. First one, you need to find some covering gadget, which I will explain in the next slide. And the second is that the target app's fingerprint authorization needs to be able to invoke from the browser. This can happen, for example, because some of the mobile payment apps, they want to support the user to do the payment from the web browsers. And okay, so what is the covering gadget? Covering gadgets are those activities in the benign apps that, first of all, it allows invocation from browser, of course, and second, it allows the attacker to control its visual content. And the third one is that it has to have the translucent property. So the covering gadgets usually come in the form of deep links. One common cases I've seen are in those bug bounty program. I've seen people can find some open redirect in web view in some popular apps. So this case actually already met the first two conditions. However, the more difficult one is also this web view activity needs to have the translucent property. So I know it is not easy to find such kind of covering gadget, and for me, I didn't spend much time on this one currently, so I only be able to find one of such cases in some rather popular app with partial content control. Suppose that you already have find some covering gadget, and then what you want to do is that in your malicious web page or your attack web page, you want to first use deep link to launch the target fingerprint activity. And then at the same time, you will use a script to launch the covering gadget, meaning those covering activities inside existing apps. You can see that here we prepared several covering gadgets in the same attack. That's because only from the web browser, the attacker cannot know which app is installed on the victim device. So the better strategy here is that he would try all of them. Once one of them is installed, then the attack can work. And this table here summarizes all of our attack techniques as well as those non-attacks. And the green cells in the table means that it is easier or more practical to launch that attack. So you can see that the most powerful attack for sure is the risk attack that is exploiting the Android risk condition bug. Another difference you may notice of our new attacks from those known attacks is that our new attacks doesn't require any permission, so it can be considered more practical here. Finally, some suggestions to Android developers. First of all, use the Android X biometric API, which is a wrapper for the fingerprint manager and biometric prompt API, and it has more secure implementation. And second, I suggest you to use those third-party fingerprint libraries more carefully, because we also did some investigation into those open source libraries and find some of them actually vulnerable. Finally, if you may want to check your existing implementations, and if you are using the fingerprint manager API, you may want to make sure that you do the canceling in the correct place, namely the unpause event. And this is the last part. Again, some demonstration. And this time, we will show the demonstration with the covering being set to be transparent, so you can see what happens in the background. And there will be two demonstrations. And the first one is the same as our first demonstration, just with transparent covering. And the second one is more interesting. It is it's targeting some payment app, and it also combines the touch-jacking attack techniques here. So this is the first demonstration. First, we launch the Magics Manager to check the super user list as usual. We can see right now there's no app being granted the root permission. Then we launch our demonstration malicious app. And when the attack happens, you can see underneath the covering, there's the fingerprint dialog requesting user to input his fingerprint to authorize the root permission. And after user do so, then our malicious app has been granted the root permission. But the attacker, for sure, they don't need to make the covering translucent to let the victim know what happens. And the second one is the attack targeting the payment app. And we can see when this attack happens, what happens in the background is first, inside that payment app, it will first ask the user to tap some button. So this is why we need the touch jacking here to trick the user into pushing the button. And then after the user tap the button, then it's the fingerprint dialog. Need user to authorize to proceed to complete the payment. Then we use the fingerprint jacking as before. After the user put his finger onto the fingerprint sensor, the payment transaction has been completed, and the money has been transferred to our malicious app. Yeah, and this is our final demonstration, and thank you for your time. And if you are interested in this talk, you may also want to check our white paper, which includes more details. And well, any questions are welcome. Thanks.